The autumn morning air carried a crisp chill as Princess Charlotte stepped out of the black Range Rover at Westminster Abbey. At 9 years old, she had already mastered the art of royal composure, her small shoulders squared beneath her navy blue coat as cameras flashed around her. Today marked another important royal engagement, a memorial service honoring fallen soldiers, and Charlotte understood the gravity of such occasions, even at her young age. Sergeant James Morrison stood, at attention near the Abbey's entrance, his red tunic pristine and his bearskin hat perfectly positioned. He had served the Royal Guard for 8 years, and his dedication to protocol was unwavering. Every royal event followed the same precise choreography, each guard knowing exactly where to stand, when to move, and how to respond to any situation that might arise. Charlotte walked between her parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, her polished black shoes clicking against the ancient stone pathway. Her younger brother Louis fidgeted beside her, occasionally tugging at his formal attire, but Charlotte remained focused on the ceremony ahead. She had been attending such events since she could walk, learning the importance of duty and service that came with her royal birthright. The service began with the usual fanfare, hymns echoing through the Abbey's vaulted ceiling as hundreds of dignitaries, military personnel, and royal family members filled the historic pews. Charlotte sat perfectly, still her hands folded in her lap, occasionally glancing around at the magnificent surroundings. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the congregation, and the smell of burning candles filled the air. During the service, Charlotte noticed something that others might have missed. In the third row, she spotted an elderly gentleman who seemed distressed. His breathing appeared labored, and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead, despite the cool temperature inside the Abbey. The man was clearly trying to maintain his composure, not wanting to cause a disruption during such a solemn occasion. Charlotte's sharp eyes caught the subtle signs of distress that even the trained security personnel had missed. The man's face had grown pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the prayer book. She realized that he might be experiencing a medical emergency, but the strict protocol of royal events meant that no one would dare interrupt the ceremony, unless absolutely necessary. Looking around carefully, Charlotte spotted Sergeant Morrison standing at his designated position near the altar. His eyes remained fixed ahead, following protocol to the letter. Charlotte knew that the guards were trained to notice everything, but from his position the sergeant couldn't see the gentleman in distress. The young princess faced a dilemma that would test her understanding of both royal protocol and human compassion. She had been taught never to cause disruptions during official ceremonies, to always maintain proper decorum, and to let the adults handle any situations that might arise. Yet here was someone who clearly needed help, and she might be the only person in a position to do something about it. Charlotte glanced at her parents, but they were focused on the service, their attention directed toward the altar where the ceremony continued. Her mother had always taught her about the importance of kindness and helping others, values that sometimes conflicted with the rigid expectations of royal behavior. The elderly gentleman's condition seemed to be worsening. His breathing became more shallow, and he appeared to be fighting to stay upright in his seat. Charlotte realized that if she waited much longer, it might be too late to help him. The weight of responsibility settled on her young shoulders as she considered her options. She couldn't simply shout or wave her arms to get attention, as that would create exactly the kind of scene that royal protocol was designed to prevent. She couldn't leave her seat without permission, and speaking out during the ceremony would be completely inappropriate. Yet doing nothing felt equally wrong. Charlotte's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to alert someone to the situation, without breaking protocol or causing a major disruption. She had observed the intricate system of signals and communications used by the Royal Protection Team during previous events, noting how they could communicate urgent information through subtle gestures and coded movements. The ceremony continued, around her, with prayers being offered for the fallen soldiers and their families. The solemnity of the occasion made Charlotte even more aware of the delicate balance between respect for the ceremony and the urgent need to help someone in distress. As she watched the elderly gentleman struggle, Charlotte remembered something. Her grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, had once told her about true leadership. It wasn't just about following rules and maintaining appearances, but about knowing when to act with courage and compassion, even when it meant taking risks. The young princess took a deep breath and made her decision. She would find a way to help the gentleman while respecting the gravity of the ceremony and maintaining the dignity expected of her position. But she would need to be clever about it, using her understanding of royal protocol and the guards' training to communicate the emergency without causing chaos. Charlotte slowly turned her attention back to Sergeant Morrison, studying his position and trying to determine the best way to catch his attention. She knew that the guards were trained to notice even the smallest unusual movements from the royal family, as these could indicate potential security concerns or other important matters. The weight of her decision pressed down on her small frame as she prepared to take action. In the next few moments, she would need to find a way to bridge the gap between royal protocol and human necessity, demonstrating wisdom beyond her years while potentially saving someone's life. The elderly gentleman's labored breathing continued, and Charlotte knew that time was running out. Whatever she decided to do, she would need to act soon, and she would need to be both subtle and effective in getting Sergeant Morrison's attention without disrupting the sacred ceremony taking place around them. Charlotte carefully observed Sergeant Morrison's position, noting how his eyes periodically swept the congregation in a methodical pattern, just as she had seen the guards do at other royal events. She understood that while he appeared to be standing at rigid attention, he was actually constantly monitoring the surroundings for any signs of trouble or unusual activity. The young princess slowly and deliberately adjusted her posture, sitting slightly forward in her pew. It was a small movement, but one that she hoped would catch the sergeant's attention during his next visual sweep of the royal family's section. The guards were trained to notice even the subtlest changes in the royals' behavior, as these could signal everything from discomfort to security concerns. When Sergeant Morrison's gaze passed over the royal pew during his routine surveillance, Charlotte was ready. She made brief, direct eye contact with him, something that rarely happened during formal ceremonies. The intensity of her gaze was unusual for the typically well-behaved princess, and Morrison immediately recognized that something was different. Charlotte then did something that demonstrated remarkable intelligence for someone her age. She slowly and deliberately looked toward the third row where the elderly gentleman sat, then back to Sergeant Morrison. She repeated this eye movement pattern twice, creating a clear directional signal that something in that area required attention. The sergeant, trained to read such subtle communications, understood immediately that the young princess was trying to alert him to something important. However, he couldn't simply break formation to investigate without proper cause. Royal protocol demanded that he maintain his position unless there was a clear and immediate threat to the royal family's safety. Charlotte realized that her initial signal hadn't been enough to prompt immediate action. She needed to convey the urgency of the situation more clearly, while still maintaining the appearance of proper royal behavior. Drawing upon her observations of how her parents and grandparents handled delicate situations, she decided to escalate her communication. The young princess slowly reached up and touched the small pearl brooch on her coat lapel, a gesture that might appear to be a nervous habit to casual observers. However, she had noticed that the royal protection officers often used similar subtle hand signals to communicate with each other during events. By touching the brooch while maintaining eye contact with Sergeant Morrison, she was attempting to indicate that this was a matter requiring immediate attention. Sergeant Morrison caught the gesture and recognized it as deliberately communicative, rather than random fidgeting. His years of training had taught him to distinguish between casual movements and intentional signals. The combination of Charlotte's unusual eye contact, directional glancing, and deliberate hand gesture created a pattern that clearly indicated she was trying to communicate something urgent. Meanwhile, the elderly gentleman's condition continued to deteriorate. His face had grown increasingly pale, and small drops of perspiration were now visible on his forehead. He was clearly struggling to remain conscious, gripping the back of the pew in front of him for support. The man's dignity prevented him from calling out for help during such a solemn ceremony, but his physical distress was becoming more apparent to anyone who looked closely. Charlotte noticed that a woman sitting next to the gentleman had begun to look concerned. She was glancing at him with worried expressions, clearly noticing his distress but uncertain about what to do in such a formal setting. The woman appeared to be his wife, and her growing anxiety was evident in her fidgeting hands and frequent glances toward the exits. Understanding that the situation was becoming more critical by the moment, Charlotte decided to take a more direct approach while still maintaining the appearance of proper royal decorum. She slowly raised her left hand to her chest, as if adjusting her necklace, then pointed with one finger toward the third row. The movement was subtle enough to avoid attracting attention from the general congregation, but clear enough for the trained guard to understand. Sergeant Morrison's eyes followed Charlotte's subtle indication and immediately spotted the elderly gentleman in distress. His military training kicked in as he assessed the situation, recognizing the signs of a potential medical emergency. The man's labored breathing, pale complexion, and obvious struggle to remain upright clearly indicated that immediate medical attention was needed. The sergeant faced his own protocol dilemma. Royal ceremonies had strict procedures for handling disruptions, and medical emergencies required careful coordination to avoid panic or chaos. However, he also understood that human life took precedence over ceremonial protocol, and the situation clearly warranted immediate action. Morrison made a quick decision based on his training and experience. He knew that the Royal Protection team had established procedures for handling medical emergencies during public events. The key was to act swiftly and efficiently while minimizing disruption to the ceremony and maintaining the dignity of all involved. The sergeant caught the attention of his colleague, Corporal Davies, who was positioned near the side entrance of the abbey. Using a series of subtle hand signals that were part of their standard communication protocol, Morrison indicated that there was a medical situation in the third row that required immediate but discreet attention. Corporal Davies immediately understood the coded message and began moving toward the indicated location, taking a route that would attract minimal attention from the congregation. Meanwhile, Morrison used his radio to quietly alert the medical team that was always on standby during royal events. Charlotte watched with satisfaction as her signal prompted the appropriate response. She had successfully bridged the gap between royal protocol and humanitarian necessity, demonstrating that sometimes the most important rule was knowing when other rules needed to be broken for the greater good. The young princess maintained her composed appearance throughout the unfolding response, but inside she felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She had done what she believed was right, but she was also aware that her actions represented a departure from the strict behavioral expectations that governed royal conduct during formal ceremonies. As the discreet medical response began to unfold around the elderly gentleman, Charlotte reflected on the lesson this experience was teaching her about leadership and responsibility. Sometimes being royal meant more than just following protocol. It meant having the courage to act when others needed help, even when it meant taking personal risks or challenging established procedures. Corporal Davies moved with practiced stealth through the abbey, his movements so smooth and natural that most of the congregation remained focused on the ceremony. His years of training in crowd control and emergency response had taught him how to navigate through public spaces without drawing unwanted attention, especially during high-profile events where maintaining decorum was paramount. As Davies approached the third row, he could clearly see the elderly gentleman's distress. The man was now leaning heavily against his wife, who was whispering urgent words of concern while trying to support his weight. Her face showed the strain of someone trying to remain calm in a crisis while surrounded by hundreds of people in a formal setting. The corporal positioned himself at the end of the row and made quiet eye contact with the elderly man's wife. She looked at him with obvious relief, recognizing immediately that help had arrived. Davies held up one finger to indicate she should wait a moment while he assessed the situation more thoroughly. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued to watch the unfolding rescue operation from her position in the royal pew. She was amazed by the efficiency and discretion with which the guards were handling the emergency. The ceremony continued around them, with most attendees completely unaware of the medical crisis being addressed just a few rows away. The elderly gentleman, whose name was Harold Pemberton, had been looking forward to this memorial service for months. As a former Royal Air Force pilot who had served during the Falklands War, the ceremony held deep personal meaning for him. He had been determined to attend despite feeling unwell that morning, not wanting to miss the opportunity to honor his fallen comrades. Harold's wife, Margaret, had noticed his declining condition throughout the morning but had respected his determination to attend the service. Now, as she felt his weight increasing against her shoulder and noticed his increasingly shallow breathing, she was grateful that someone had finally noticed their situation and was coming to help. Corporal Davies quietly knelt beside the row and spoke in hushed tones to Margaret Pemberton. He identified himself as part of the Royal Protection Team and assured her that medical assistance was on the way. His calm, professional demeanor immediately put her at ease, even as her husband's condition continued to deteriorate. The corporal quickly assessed Harold's symptoms, noting the signs of what appeared to be either a heart episode or severe respiratory distress. His basic medical training allowed him to recognize that this was indeed a serious situation, requiring immediate professional medical attention, not just assistance getting to fresh air. At that moment, Dr. Sarah Chen, the medical officer assigned to the royal event, appeared at Davies' side. She had been alerted by Sergeant Morrison's radio communication and had made her way through the Abbey's side corridors to reach the scene as quickly as possible. Dr. Chen was an experienced emergency physician who regularly worked royal events and understood the delicate balance between providing medical care and maintaining event protocol. Dr. Chen immediately began her assessment of Harold, while Davies coordinated with additional security personnel to create a discreet pathway for evacuation if necessary. The doctor checked Harold's pulse and breathing, noting that while his condition was serious, it was not immediately life-threatening if treated properly and quickly. Charlotte watched as the medical team worked with quiet efficiency around Harold. She was struck by how the adults had transformed her simple signal into a coordinated response that was both professional and compassionate. The young princess began to understand more deeply the complex network of people whose job it was to ensure everyone's safety and well-being during royal events. Dr. Chen determined that Harold needed to be moved to a location where she could provide more comprehensive medical attention and potentially administer medication or oxygen if needed. However, moving him would require interrupting the ceremony for at least some of the attendees in his section. The medical team faced a challenging decision. Harold's condition required immediate attention that couldn't be provided adequately in his current location. But moving him would create exactly the kind of disruption that royal event protocol was designed to prevent. Dr. Chen weighed the medical necessities against the ceremonial importance of the ongoing service. Sergeant Morrison, monitoring the situation from his position, made the decision that would later be discussed in royal protection training sessions for years to come. Understanding that human life always took precedence over protocol, he authorized the discreet evacuation of Harold from the Abbey, accepting that some disruption was unavoidable. The evacuation began with Corporal Davies quietly asking the people in Harold's row to step aside temporarily. Most complied immediately, recognizing the seriousness of the situation despite not fully understanding what was happening. The whispered explanations of medical emergency were enough to ensure cooperation from the concerned congregation members. Charlotte observed as several people immediately offered assistance, demonstrating the same spirit of service and care that the memorial ceremony was meant to honor. She watched older veterans step forward to help carry Harold, their own formal attire and military bearing evident even in the subdued lighting of the Abbey. As Harold was carefully helped to his feet, supported on both sides by Davies and another guard, Charlotte felt a complex mixture of emotions. She was proud that her actions had helped save someone in need, but she was also aware that she had initiated a chain of events that was now affecting the solemn ceremony that so many people had come to attend. Margaret Pemberton gathered their belongings while staying close to her husband, speaking quiet words of encouragement as the group slowly made their way toward the Abbey's side exit. Her gratitude was evident in her whispered thanks to each person who had assisted them, and her relief was visible as Harold's breathing seemed to improve slightly once he was upright and moving. The small procession moved with as much dignity and discretion as possible, but their departure inevitably caught the attention of nearby congregation members. Whispered conversations began to spread through the surrounding sections as people tried to understand what was happening while maintaining appropriate reverence for the ongoing ceremony. Charlotte realized that her decision to signal for help had created ripple effects that extended far beyond her original intention. She began to understand that leadership decisions, even small ones, could have consequences that reached much further than initially anticipated, affecting not just the immediate situation but the broader context in which events unfolded. As Harold Pemberton was carefully escorted from the Abbey, the ceremony continued with remarkable composure from both the officiants and the congregation. The Dean of Westminster, experienced in handling unexpected situations during high-profile services, maintained the flow of the memorial without acknowledging the discreet medical emergency unfolding in the third row. Once outside the Abbey, Dr. Chen had Harold seated in a quiet alcove where she could conduct a more thorough examination. The fresh autumn air seemed to help his breathing immediately, and some color began to return to his previously pale complexion. Margaret held his hand while the doctor checked his vital signs and asked about his medical history and current medications. Harold revealed that he had been experiencing chest tightness and shortness of breath for several days, but hadn't wanted to miss the memorial service. As a former pilot, he felt a deep obligation to honor his fellow servicemen, some of whom hadn't returned from their missions. His determination to attend, despite his physical discomfort, exemplified the dedication and sacrifice that the ceremony was meant to commemorate. Dr. Chen determined that while Harold's condition was serious and required immediate medical attention, it was likely a combination of stress, anxiety about the ceremony, and an underlying cardiac issue that could be managed with proper treatment. She administered medication to help stabilize his condition and called for an ambulance to transport him to the hospital for more comprehensive evaluation. Back inside the Abbey, Charlotte continued to participate in the ceremony, while part of her attention remained focused on what was happening outside. She had learned to multitask during royal events, maintaining proper decorum while staying aware of her surroundings and any developing situations. Sergeant Morrison had returned to his position, but remained in radio contact with the medical team outside. The successful handling of the emergency had reinforced his confidence in the royal protection protocols, while also highlighting the importance of being alert to unconventional signals from family members, even very young ones. The memorial service reached its most solemn moment as the names of fallen soldiers were read aloud. Charlotte listened to each name with renewed appreciation for the sacrifices being honored, thinking about Harold's determination to attend, despite his illness, and the courage it had taken for her to break protocol to help him. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, word quietly spread among the royal protection team about how the medical emergency had been detected and reported. Several guards were impressed by Princess Charlotte's awareness and quick thinking, though they were also noting the unconventional nature of her communication method for future training purposes. Outside, Harold had stabilized significantly under Dr. Chen's care. The medication had eased his breathing difficulties and his color had improved markedly. Margaret was relieved but insisted that they wait until after the ceremony to leave for the hospital, not wanting their situation to cause any further disruption to the memorial service. Harold, despite his medical scare, was deeply moved by the care and attention he had received. He was particularly touched to learn that his distress had been noticed by Princess Charlotte, a child who had shown the awareness and compassion to ensure he received help when he needed it most. The ambulance arrived discreetly at a side entrance to the Abbey, and the paramedics conferred with Dr. Chen about Harold's condition and treatment. They agreed that while hospitalization was necessary, the immediate crisis had passed, and transport could wait until the ceremony concluded to avoid any additional disruption. As the memorial service moved toward its closing prayers, Charlotte reflected on the morning's events and what they had taught her about responsibility and leadership. She had learned that sometimes the most important actions were the small ones that others might not even notice, and that true service sometimes required taking personal risks for the benefit of others. The ceremony concluded with the traditional playing of the last post, the haunting bugle call that honored fallen soldiers. The sound echoed through the Abbey's ancient stones, creating a moment of profound silence and reflection that touched everyone present, including Harold, who could hear the music from his position outside. As the congregation began to file out of the Abbey, Charlotte walked with her parents toward the exit, maintaining her royal composure while inwardly proud of her role in helping Harold. She had successfully navigated a complex situation that required both courage and discretion, demonstrating maturity beyond her years. The Prince and Princess of Wales had noticed the earlier disruption, but hadn't immediately understood Charlotte's role in it. As they prepared to leave the Abbey, Sergeant Morrison approached them to provide a discreet briefing about the morning's events and their daughter's remarkable observation and quick thinking. Charlotte's parents listened with a mixture of pride and concern as Morrison explained how their daughter had noticed the medical emergency and found a way to alert the Royal Protection Team without disrupting the ceremony. They were impressed by her compassion and intelligence while also recognizing the complexity of the situation she had navigated. As the royal family emerged from the Abbey, they were met by Dr. Chen, who provided an update on Harold's condition. She explained that the elderly veteran was stable and would be transported to the hospital for further evaluation, but that the quick response to Charlotte's alert had likely prevented a much more serious situation. Harold and Margaret Pemberton were waiting near the ambulance when the royal family appeared. Despite his medical condition, Harold insisted on standing to greet Princess Charlotte, wanting to personally thank the young girl who had potentially saved his life through her quick thinking and compassionate action. The meeting between Charlotte and Harold became an unexpected and moving conclusion to the morning's events. The elderly veteran, still weak but determined, expressed his gratitude to the young princess who had noticed his distress and taken action to help him when others had not. Charlotte, meeting Harold face to face for the first time, was struck by his dignity and grace despite his medical emergency. She could see in his eyes the same sense of duty and service that the memorial ceremony had been designed to honor, and she felt a deeper connection to the values and traditions that her royal role represented. Margaret Pemberton was emotional, as she thanked not only Charlotte but the entire Royal Protection Team for their professional and compassionate response to her husband's medical crisis. She expressed amazement that someone so young had been alert enough to notice what many adults had missed and brave enough to act on her observations. The conversation between Charlotte and Harold Pemberton was brief but profound, watched respectfully by the Royal Protection Team and medical personnel who had witnessed the morning's extraordinary events. Harold, despite his weakened condition, spoke with the clarity and dignity that had defined his military service and civilian life. Harold told Charlotte about his years as an RAF pilot and his deep respect for the fellow servicemen being honored at the memorial. He explained that attending the ceremony hadn't been just a choice for him, but a duty to the friends and colleagues who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. His words helped Charlotte understand why he had been so determined to attend, despite feeling unwell. Charlotte listened with the same focused attention she had shown during the ceremony, asking thoughtful questions about Harold's service and the importance of remembering fallen soldiers. Her genuine interest and mature understanding impressed the adults around them, who observed a young person displaying wisdom and empathy far beyond her years. The Princess of Wales watched her daughter's interaction with Harold with growing pride and some amazement. She recognized that Charlotte was demonstrating exactly the kind of authentic compassion and social awareness that the royal family hoped to instill in the next generation. But seeing it displayed so naturally in such circumstances was genuinely moving. Dr. Chen, monitoring Harold's condition throughout the conversation, was pleased to see that the positive interaction was actually helping his recovery. The veteran's pride in meeting Charlotte and gratitude for her assistance seemed to be providing emotional healing alongside the medical treatment he had received. Margaret Pemberton captured several photos of her husband's meeting with Charlotte, understanding that this would become one of the most meaningful memories of Harold's later years. She was still amazed that a 9-year-old child had been observant enough to notice her husband's distress and resourceful enough to alert the appropriate people. As the conversation continued, Charlotte learned more about the complex emotions that surrounded memorial services for veterans. Harold explained that attending such events was both an honor and a burden, as they brought back memories of lost friends while also celebrating the values and sacrifices that had shaped his generation. The young princess began to understand that her role in helping Harold represented more than just a medical emergency response. She had helped ensure that a veteran could participate in honoring his fallen comrades fulfilling what he saw as a sacred obligation to their memory and service. Sergeant Morrison observed the interaction while continuing to coordinate the discreet departure arrangements for the Pembertons. He was struck by how Charlotte's quick thinking had not only potentially saved Harold's life, but had also created an opportunity for meaningful connection between different generations, united by shared values of service and sacrifice. The ambulance crew, who had been waiting patiently for the conclusion of the ceremony and the royal departure, were also moved by the scene. They had transported many patients over the years, but rarely had they witnessed such a personal and touching conclusion to a medical emergency. As the time came for Harold to be transported to the hospital, he insisted on standing once more to properly thank Charlotte and her family. Despite Margaret's concerned protests about his exertion, Harold felt that formal respect was required for the young princess who had shown such care for his welfare. Charlotte, understanding the significance of the moment, curtsied slightly as Harold offered his thanks, demonstrating the royal protocol she had learned while also expressing genuine warmth and concern for his continued health. The exchange embodied the best traditions of both royal service and military honor. The Prince of Wales, who had been quietly observing his daughter's handling of the situation, stepped forward to shake Harold's hand and express his own gratitude for the veteran's service. The prince understood that this spontaneous meeting represented exactly the kind of meaningful connection between the royal family and the people they served that made such public engagements worthwhile. Dr. Chen provided final instructions to Margaret about Harold's care and follow-up treatment, while also noting in her medical report the positive impact that Charlotte's timely intervention had made on the outcome. The doctor realized that this incident would likely become a case study in the importance of public awareness and quick response during medical emergencies. As Harold was helped into the ambulance, he waved to Charlotte through the window, his gratitude evident in his expression. Despite his physical exhaustion, Margaret squeezed Charlotte's hand one final time, whispering a heartfelt thank you that brought tears to the young princess's eyes. The royal family watched as the ambulance departed, carrying Harold toward the medical care he needed while also carrying with him a remarkable story of compassion, quick thinking, and the unexpected ways that people's lives could intersect during moments of crisis. Charlotte felt a complex mixture of emotions as she watched the ambulance disappear into London traffic. She was proud of her actions and grateful that Harold was receiving proper medical attention, but she was also processing the weight of responsibility that came with being in a position to help others and the importance of being alert to the needs of people around her. The ride back to their residence was quiet, with Charlotte's parents allowing her time to process the morning's events while also reflecting on their own pride in their daughter's actions. The Prince and Princess of Wales understood that Charlotte had demonstrated qualities of leadership and compassion that would serve her well in her future royal duties. Sergeant Morrison, riding in the security vehicle behind the royal car, was already composing his report about the incident for his superiors. He recognized that Charlotte's actions had highlighted both strengths and potential improvements in royal event security protocols, while also demonstrating the value of maintaining awareness of unconventional communication from family members. Back at the hospital, Harold was admitted for observation and further testing, with doctors confirming Dr. Chen's assessment that the quick response had likely prevented a more serious cardiac event. Margaret called their adult children to inform them about the day's events, knowing that the story of their father's rescue by Princess Charlotte would become a treasured family legend. 3 days after the memorial service, Charlotte received an unexpected phone call that would provide a perfect conclusion to her remarkable act of compassion. Harold Pemberton, now recovering well at home under Margaret's careful supervision, had asked if he could speak with the young princess who had helped save his life. The call was arranged through proper royal channels, with Charlotte's parents ensuring that the conversation would be both appropriate and meaningful for their daughter. They understood that this follow-up contact would help Charlotte see the long-term impact of her quick thinking and compassionate action during the memorial service. Harold's voice was stronger and clearer than it had been outside the abbey, and his gratitude was evident from his first words. He told Charlotte that the doctors had confirmed she had potentially saved his life by ensuring he received prompt medical attention. Without her intervention, His condition could have deteriorated to a life-threatening level before anyone else noticed his distress. Charlotte listened with fascination as Harold described his recovery process and the pride he felt in knowing that someone so young had cared enough to help him. He explained that her actions had reinforced his faith in the values of service and compassion that he had tried to live by throughout his military and civilian career. The veteran also shared something that deeply moved Charlotte. He told her that several of his fellow veterans had heard about the incident and wanted her to know how much her actions meant to their community. Harold explained that veterans often felt forgotten or overlooked, but Charlotte's awareness and quick response had shown them that their service and welfare still mattered to the younger generation. Margaret joined the conversation to express her own continued gratitude and to share how the story of Charlotte's compassion had already begun spreading through their community. She mentioned that local newspapers had heard about the incident and wanted to write about it, though the family had declined interviews to respect the royal family's privacy. Charlotte was surprised to learn about the broader interest in her actions, not fully understanding how unusual and newsworthy her behavior had been. To her, she had simply done what seemed right in the moment, without considering how others might perceive or interpret her decision to break protocol. Harold asked Charlotte about her thoughts on the memorial service and whether she had enjoyed learning about military history and traditions. Their conversation evolved into a broader discussion about service, duty, and the importance of remembering those who had sacrificed for their country. The young princess found herself genuinely engaged in the conversation, asking Harold questions about his flying experiences and the friends he had lost during his military service. His answers helped her understand the deep emotional significance that memorial ceremonies held for veterans and their families. During their conversation, Harold made a request that would surprise Charlotte's parents when they learned about it later. He asked if Charlotte would consider visiting him and Margaret at their home sometime, explaining that he would like to show her some of his military memorabilia and photographs from his RAF service. Charlotte was excited by the invitation, though she understood that such visits required careful planning and approval from her parents and the Royal Protection Team. She promised Harold that she would discuss the possibility with her family and let him know if such a visit could be arranged. The conversation concluded with Harold expressing one final sentiment that would stay with Charlotte for years to come. He told her that true nobility wasn't about titles or ceremony, but about having the courage to do the right thing when others needed help, regardless of personal cost or convenience. After ending the call, Charlotte spent considerable time reflecting on Harold's words and their deeper meaning. She began to understand that her actions at the memorial service had demonstrated principles that went beyond royal protocol or childhood behavior, touching on fundamental questions of human responsibility and compassion. Charlotte's parents discussed the conversation with her, helping her process both the immediate impact of her actions and the broader lessons about leadership and service. They were proud of her natural instincts, but also wanted to ensure she understood both the opportunities and responsibilities that came with her position. The Prince and Princess of Wales ultimately decided to arrange the requested visit to Harold and Margaret's home, recognizing that it would provide valuable learning opportunities for Charlotte, while also honoring the veteran who had been so grateful for their daughter's assistance. Several weeks later, Charlotte made her visit to the Pemberton home, accompanied by minimal security and carrying a small bouquet of flowers from the royal gardens. The visit was kept private, with no media coverage or official photographs, allowing for genuine personal connection between Charlotte and the couple she had helped. Harold showed Charlotte his collection of military photographs, medals, and memorabilia, telling stories about his service and the men who had served alongside him. Margaret served tea and biscuits while sharing her own perspective on military family life and the pride she felt in her husband's service. The visit reinforced for Charlotte the human stories behind the formal ceremonies and official events that filled her royal calendar. Meeting Harold in his own home, surrounded by the artifacts of his service and the warmth of his family life, helped her understand the real people whose lives intersected with royal duties and responsibilities. As Charlotte prepared to leave the Pemberton home, Harold presented her with a small RAF pin that he had worn during his service years. He explained that he wanted her to have something that represented the values of service and vigilance that she had demonstrated at the memorial ceremony, values that connected her actions to the military traditions being honored that day. Charlotte accepted the gift with genuine emotion, understanding that Harold was giving her something deeply personal and meaningful. The pin represented not just his individual service, but the broader tradition of people who dedicated their lives to watching over and protecting others, just as she had watched over him during his moment of need. Margaret walked them to the door, expressing once again her amazement that someone so young had possessed the awareness and courage to help when help was desperately needed. She told Charlotte that the story of her compassion had already become legendary among their friends and family, inspiring others to be more observant and caring in their own daily lives. The drive back to the royal residence was quiet, with Charlotte examining the RAF pin and thinking about everything she had learned from Harold about service, sacrifice, and the importance of being alert to the needs of others. She understood now that her actions at the memorial had connected her to something much larger than a single medical emergency. That evening, Charlotte shared the details of her visit with her parents, describing Harold's stories and the gift he had given her. She asked if she could keep the RAF pin in a special place in her room, where she could see it and remember the lessons Harold had taught her about courage and compassion. The Prince and Princess of Wales were deeply moved by their daughter's experience and the mature way she was processing the lessons it contained. They recognized that the events surrounding the memorial service had provided Charlotte with insights into leadership and responsibility that no formal education could have matched. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte found herself more observant. During royal events, scanning crowds not just out of curiosity but with a genuine awareness that people around her might need help or attention. Her experience with Harold had awakened in her a sense of responsibility for the welfare of others that would influence her approach to royal duties for years to come. Sergeant Morrison incorporated the memorial service incident into royal protection training programs, using it as an example of how family members could serve as additional eyes and ears during public events. Charlotte's quick thinking and effective communication had demonstrated the value of maintaining awareness beyond traditional security protocols. Harold continued his recovery and returned to participating in veteran events, always carrying with him the story of the young princess who had noticed his distress and taken action to help him. His experience became a testament to the importance of intergenerational connection and the unexpected ways that acts of compassion could bridge different worlds and backgrounds. The memorial service incident became a defining moment in Charlotte's young life, teaching her that true royal service meant being genuinely alert to the needs of others and having the courage to act on that awareness, even when it meant breaking protocol or taking personal risks. The lessons she learned from Harold Pemberton about duty, sacrifice, and vigilance would shape her understanding of her role and responsibilities for years to come. Years later, as Charlotte grew into her royal duties, she would often touch the RAF pin that Harold had given her, remembering the elderly veteran who had taught her that the most important service was often the kind that happened quietly, person to person, in moments when someone simply needed help and someone else had the awareness and courage to provide it. The story of Princess Charlotte and Harold Pemberton became more than just an account of a medical emergency at a royal event.